Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven. Today, our special guest is Daphne Gray-Grant. So, Daphne grew up in a newspaper business. Her parents owned a struggling weekly where she worked from the age 16, even when completing an honors degree in political science at the University of B.C. Eventually, she left the family business to become a senior editor at a major metropolitan daily, the Vancouver Sun, where she worked for 10 years. Then, after the birth of her children in 1994, she became a communications consultant, writing, and editing coach. So, welcome, Daphne.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So, you're not in the newspaper business anymore. You're a full-time coach.
Yeah, it looks like I got out just in time because the newspaper business barely exists anymore.
So, tell me, what made you want to change from being an editor to a coach, I guess?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. The first is that I loved being in the newspaper business. It was really fantastic for me. It suited me perfectly. But when my children were born, I had triplets, and it was such an overwhelming thing that I decided to leave the business. I went back for about a year, 1 day a week, because that was all I could manage. And then I kind of noticed that it was really hard for me to go elsewhere to work. And then at that point, the company had a big buyout offer on the table. So I guess I just took the money and ran.
Yeah.
But I'm not the kind of person who could sit around all day looking after babies, even though I had three of them. And so I started freelancing on the side. And so I started doing writing for some other organizations, mainly corporations, and doing editing for them as well. And I really enjoyed it. And I did that for a couple of years. It worked out well with my children. So it gave me the chance to have a bit of a break from childcare and to have some conversations with real live adults every week. And then one of the things I did when I went through that period of my life was that I knew I was a born editor. I was one of those people. I started editing when I was in high school. I would edit my own papers. I would edit my friends' papers. I just loved doing it. I didn't even think of it as work. And I was the same way at university. But the thing I noticed that I really hated was writing. I never enjoyed it. I always found it exceptionally difficult. And that negative feeling stayed with me even for the 10 years I worked at the newspaper. I didn't have to do a lot of writing, but I had to do some, and it was always deeply traumatic for me. And even more so because I was an editor, I was a senior person, and I felt embarrassed about what a bad and what a slow writer I was. So when I finally left the newspaper business, I was able to spend the time to figure out what was wrong with my own writing process. And once I'd done that, and once I'd kind of fixed myself or healed myself, I found I was able to help other people do the same. So that's why I started my coaching business.
Okay, so when someone contacts you, what happens? Like, what should they expect?
Well, so I mean, I work with people in a variety of different ways, but my flagship program is called Get It Done. And so I work with probably 50% book authors and 50% academics. And the academics would be generally working on a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation. Or sometimes I have full-fledged tenured professors working with me because they've never been able to develop the writing habit. So, a great many people in academia are really dysfunctional writers. And they're troubled by that because one of the things you have to do in academia is you're expected to publish a lot. So, for someone who gets to that position and isn't comfortable with writing, it's a really difficult spot to be in. So I work to help them as well. But this program, the heart of it is accountability. So if someone joins the program, and they're accepted. So I don't accept everyone who applies. You have to be accepted into the program. But if they apply and are accepted, then they have to report into me once a day, 5 days a week, telling me how many words they wrote that day, how long it took them, and what time of day they did the writing at. And then there's also a spot on the questionnaire for them to ask me questions if they want to. And I really encourage people to do that, because it's in those questions that we're able to get to a conversation where I can really discover some of the things that they could change a little bit or tweak to make their writing lives better or happier. And so the program has been really successful. I've helped many, many people finish their books. I've helped many, many people finish their dissertations or write papers for peer-reviewed journals. So it's not a program where I'm dealing with the content per se. What I'm dealing with is basically the psychology of writing.
Okay. Now, can you sort of tell us some of the common problems you've seen? I mean, or
Oh,
what do
yes.
people, I mean, I'm assuming people have a problem when they come to you. So,
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I would say the most common problem is that people edit while they write.
mm,
So, and this can look slightly different depending on the individual. Some people might write a sentence, some people might even only write a word, and then they stop and is this the right word or is this the right sentence? How can I make it better? And other people might do it a little bit differently. They might manage to squeeze a whole paragraph out of themselves before they reread it and start trying to improve it. But this editing while you write, or as I sometimes call it, editing on the go, is very, very harmful to people for a couple of reasons. One is that it causes you to use a different part of your brain. So the part of the brain we use for writing is the creative part. It's buried deep in the center of our brains. And the part of the brain we use for editing is the prefrontal cortex, so right at the front of our brains. And if you have to flip back and forth between those different parts of the brains, first of all, it's uncomfortable to do that. Second of all, it's going to slow you down. And I guess the third problem is it inspires this kind of self-doubt. I think what happens is that once we allow that critical voice to come into our heads, which is so important for editing, but it shuts down the creative part of our brains. I almost like to see these two different parts of our brains as two separate people. And the creative brain is really like the younger sister. And the editing brain is like the bossy older brother. And if the bossy older brother gets in charge, that younger sister is either hiding under the bed or hiding in the closet. She just doesn't want anything to do with him because she's going to get punched. And so what I want to do is I want to help people protect that younger sister from being punched. And so the way to do that is not to allow yourself to edit while you're writing. Another thing that comes with that is that for anyone working on a book or a long form project, so by long form, I mean anything longer than 5,000 words, I encourage people, if their deadlines will permit it, to wait for at least 6 weeks before they start to edit. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this in your own writing, but one of the things that happens when we edit stuff we've written ourselves is that our brains will actually correct mistakes because we remember what we've written. So I've seen this myself all the time. One of the things I have to do when I'm proofreading something I've written is I change the point size. I go up to 18 point and I change the typeface to something that looks radically different. So I normally write
mm,
in either Times New Roman or Calibri. And when I'm proofing, I always switch to papyrus, which looks a little bit like handwriting. And
mm.
so somehow the difference of the radically unusual typeface and the big point size allows me to finally see the mistakes that are there. But if you start to edit too close to when you've actually written, you're not going to see those mistakes. And I'm not just talking about, where you write off for of, like
Mhm.
little typographical mistakes like that. I'm talking about big gaps in knowledge. So what happens is if you've done the thinking, the planning, and for God's sakes, the writing yourself, then you are maximally different from your readers. And you're not going to understand or see the questions they might have in their own mind's eye. What you need to be able to do that is you need some distance. You need the chance to get perspective. And the only thing that can do that for you is time. So that's why, if deadlines permit, I encourage people to wait at least 6 weeks before they start editing.
Now, after people finish your program, do they retain you as a consultant? Like, because sometimes book projects takes years. It takes a
Yes,
long time.
yes, that's very true. So my program is on a 3-month basis. And so when people sign up, they pay one fee and they get 3 months. After that, they're all invited to continue if they wish on a month-to-month basis. And they get a discounted rate for doing that. And they can stop at the end of any month. So I've had some people who've been with me for years. I have one guy, he has finished 2 books now, and he's working on
Mhm.
his third. And he is very happy to continue along with me. I'll tell you a story about someone else I had. This one struck me as particularly interesting. She was a retired lawyer and she had written a novel. Well, she was wanting to write a novel and she'd gotten stuck at the 30,000 word point and she just couldn't get beyond the 30,000 words. So she signed up with me, and inside of 6 months, she hit 85,000. I think actually she hit 90,000 words. So she was thrilled. She was just delighted. And she said, you know what? I like editing. I'm not going to have a problem with it. Thank you very much. I'm going to go away and do this on my own now. 3 months later, she was back
Yeah.
to do the editing with me because I work with both writers and editors. And
Mhm.
so she signed up. I think she was there for another 6, 9 months, and then she finished the editing of her book. So yeah, people can continue with me. They can go away and they can come back. So probably at the end of the 3 months, roughly 50% of the people will stay on.
Now, what is an like I'm guessing you've had good clients and bad clients. So what is an ideal client that you like to work with? Like what's a good writer?
Well, I try to not use words like good and bad.
Okay, okay.
but but in terms of an ideal client for me is I like working with people who are willing to try new things, because one of the principles, some of the principles I use are kind of counterintuitive. And so for some people, I'm taking their writing process and turning it upside down. And so if you get someone who's going to freak out by that, they probably will not be interested in my group. But what happens is that the people who embrace this are amazed by how quickly they can write. I have helped people double, triple, and quadruple their writing speeds. So it makes a big difference if you do things. I have other habits I work on too. But if you do something like break the habit of editing while you write, then most people can at least double their writing speed. So I look for people who are open to new ideas. And then what else would I say? Some people expect that I am going to be responding to their content. And that is not what I do. This is an accountability program. So
Hmm.
I'm helping people show up and do the work. And that's kind of reflected in the name of the program, Get It Done. So that's what we're all about. So I'm not about, telling people. I mean, I do give people some advice if they ask me questions in particular as they're going along in their writing process, but I'm not reading their material at all. And I'm not giving them concrete feedback about how to deal with tricky plot twists. It's about how to show up and actually write every day. That's what I deal with.
Yeah, because if you give too many comments, they'll slow it down, as you say, like they'll start editing once they
Yes,
receive a comment.
yes,
So,
yes, exactly.
okay. Um, I mean, what else? Okay, you're also a communications consultant. What does that mean?
Well, so I have helped and done work for lots of groups, companies. I've done some work for several universities. So if they face a communications challenge, I help with that. I'm recently I've been scaling back my work on that
Mhm,
because I find I enjoy working with writers so much more. So right now
mhm,
I'm trying to concentrate more on that type of work. Um, and I say this because I just had a big client, which I just ended my relationship with, my
mhm.
choice, because I wanted to concentrate more on the writers I work with. But this was a group, they were a research group associated with Simon Fraser University, and I helped them produce a quarterly publication, and I maintained their website, and I wrote press releases for them. So I did all that kind of communication stuff. But I'm
Yeah,
doing
because
lots
I
of
was just thinking a lot of writers also need help with communications, I think. So
yes.
I don't know, that's another branch you could think about in the future.
Well, I do one-on-one coaching for anyone who wants that kind of thing. And if that's what they want, then it can be about anything. So I have worked with a lot of communicators who work in the corporate field, do that kind of work as well.
Now, you also have some books released. Can you tell us a little bit about the things you write?
Yes, yeah. So I don't write fiction myself. I write only nonfiction, and I've done two books, both on the subject of writing. The first one was called 8.5 Steps to Writing Faster, Better. And the second and my more recent book is um, Your Happy First Draft. And I'll just tell you a story about the name. I had originally wanted to call it Your Crappy First Draft, and I thought about it because that's what it's about, essentially.
Mhm.
It's about the benefit of writing a crappy first draft. And I thought about it and I thought, that's such a negative headline. And negative stuff maybe isn't appealing to people. So I talked to several writer friends of mine, and one of them pointed out that if you just deleted the letter H, if you deleted the letter CR from crappy and replaced it with the letter H, crappy became happy. And so that's what the cover of my book is. It does say crappy, but then it's crossed out and the word happy is written in its place. So that's how that book got its name. But that book, it's a little bit like a writing memoir, the story of my writing and the lessons I learned along the way, and basically an explanation about why everyone should embrace the idea of producing a crappy first draft. So, one of the things I argue in the book is not that you should just um, reluctantly accept that you're producing a crappy first draft. You should be delighted that you're producing a crappy first draft because it means you're writing quickly enough.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say is that if you are writing faster, it's quite interesting and a little bit counterintuitive. Many people think that writing slowly and mindfully will improve the quality of their work, but I have found the exact opposite to be true. If you write more quickly, the quality of the work usually goes up. And I think that's because we're able to outwrite our conscious editing brain and really tap into the creative brain, which is where all the good stuff comes from.
Oh, very cool. So, Daphne, you're going to do a reading for us. Could you give us a little bit of context of what you're reading before you start?
Yeah, so this again is from my book, Your Happy First Draft. And in the book, I talk about my own history as a writer. And in the chapter I'm going to read from, it's the beginning of a particular chapter. And I talk about the writing lessons that I got from my own father, who was also a writer. All right, so let me just flip to the correct page here. The chapter title is When You Write, Only Write. My late father was a writer who started his working life in public relations. But when I was in high school, he changed gears and bought a struggling neighborhood newspaper for the thrift sale price of a second-hand car, $5,000. Despite his literary aspirations, he clearly had learning disabilities. He was a bright and well-informed man, but he never read at length. Instead, he merely glanced at newspapers or flipped through books. No one diagnosed him as having a learning disability. He started high school in 1931, some 32 years before experts coined the term. And in any case, he steered clear of doctors as if they offered problems rather than help. But 2 of my children have dyslexia, and one has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I now know the hallmarks of these disorders. My father's writing offered even more proof, for he always delayed doing anything until the last possible minute. Researchers now link procrastination to ADHD. Sometimes I went into my father's dark, wood-paneled study to watch him write. The setting was like a detective's office in a 1950s movie. With my dad's head swathed in smoke from his ever-present pipe, he pounded out his stories with 2 fingers on sheets of canary yellow newsprint jammed into a portable Underwood typewriter. Often he stared vacantly into the void, trying to decide what to write next, before resuming his Gatling gun typing. After a few sentences, he yanked the paper out of the typewriter and attacked it with a red pen, adding words here, deleting others there. As he offered the classic example of bad role modeling, I absorbed how not to write. Too bad I thought I was learning the reverse. When I went to high school, I approached writing as I'd seen it done at home. I wrote a sentence and began editing at once. I paused and then wrote sentence number 2. From there, I returned to editing sentence number 1, yes, for a second time, and then edited sentence number 2. I continued to write in this painfully slow, start-stop fashion for my entire school career and my early professional life. Why did no one ever teach me the concept of the happy first draft? Teachers at my high school thought they had trained me well for writing by giving me plenty of practice, and in a way they had. A small Catholic liberal arts institution, the school required students to take exams every term, hour-long ones at Christmas and Easter, 3-hour ones at year's end. The place did a second-rate job with sciences. We had inadequate labs and poor teaching in those subjects. But our English, literature, and history classes were superb, requiring a plethora of essays. By grade 11, I could and did produce an essay each week on a broad range of topics. The papers arrived back on my desk with good marks, but they still bled with red ink from the hands of the nuns. God's Army marked my spelling errors, sentence fragments, unclear antecedents, faulty punctuation, and critical lapses in judgment in crimson. I quickly learned my objective was to avoid errors. If I wrote too quickly, I figured, I made more of them. So I learned to write slowly, double and triple checking each sentence as it fell onto the page. I also learned a habit I maintain today. I never use red ink when editing. Too many people have had negative experiences in high school. Whenever I edit for clients, I always put my notes in green or blue. As you can imagine, and perhaps as you've experienced yourself, editing while you write is compelling. We do it with the best of intentions because we want to improve our writing. But the process is both slow and painful. At least 90% of non-professionals I coach write in the stop and start again fashion. Even a few professionals do. In 2011, I interviewed the highly skilled writer Arthur Plotnick, author of what I believe to be the best style guide on the market, Spunk and Bite. During our talk, he confessed to me that he inveterately edited while he wrote. I don't think I could do anything else, he said. Well, he's Arthur Plotnick. He's allowed. But the rest of us should be more hesitant. Editing and writing appear to be similar jobs because they both involve sitting at a computer trying to work with words. But they are entirely different work using different parts of our brains. In one case, we're producing the words, a creative task, and in another, we're trying to improve them, a linear logical job. If you're unhappy with your writing process because it's too painful or too slow, breaking the habit of editing while you write may be the single best fix you can make.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I,
You're welcome.
I hope writers listen to you and try a new technique, and we'll see how they do.
Yeah.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrar.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.